Welcome to Time in History. I'm Professor Bill. History is not just dates and events. It is a collection of moments, captured in a single frame. Some were celebrated, some revealed uncomfortable truths, and some were never meant to be remembered. Tonight, we step into those moments. Look closely. In 1936, at a shipyard ceremony in Hamburg, nearly every worker raised his arm during a political rally. Everyone except one man. His name was August Landmesser. He refused because the woman he loved was Jewish. For that quiet act of defiance, he was arrested, separated from his family, and later sent to war. This image survived because it proved something powerful. Not everyone complied. In 1948 in Illinois, 4 children sat on their front steps beside a handwritten sign. Their parents were bankrupt and overwhelmed. The sign offered them to strangers. This wasn't a stunt. It was desperation. The photograph shocked the country, then quietly faded from headlines. It didn't match the image of post-war prosperity America wanted to believe in. In 1945, school children presented the American ambassador in Moscow with a carved wooden emblem as a gesture of friendship. It hung in his office for 7 years. Then technicians discovered something hidden inside. The decorative gift contained a concealed listening device. No wires, no visible power source. It became one of the most elegant intelligence operations of the early Cold War. In London, in 1938, mothers tested protective breathing equipment designed for infants. The memory of chemical warfare from the previous war still haunted Europe. Officials feared civilians could become targets again. These devices were built to keep babies alive during possible attacks. The images were rarely shown. They revealed just how close people believed another catastrophe was. In 1946, in Austria, a young boy sat among the ruins holding a new pair of shoes. He wasn't smiling. He was overwhelmed. After years of war, even basic clothing had become a luxury. This photograph captured a small moment that rarely made headlines. Victory had ended the fighting, but it had not ended hardship. In 1967, during the Boston Marathon, race officials tried to physically remove a runner mid-race. Her name was Kathrine Switzer. Women were not officially allowed to compete. She had registered using her initials. She finished the race anyway. That photograph didn't just capture a moment. It forced the rules to change. In 1944, in occupied France, a resistance fighter named Georges Blend stood before a firing squad. Moments before the shots were fired, he smiled. Not out of madness, but defiance. The image circulated quietly after the war. It showed something textbooks rarely describe: courage that survives even in the face of certain death. In 1863, London opened the world's first underground railway. The carriages were powered by steam. Passengers traveled beneath the city through smoky tunnels. It wasn't glamorous. It was experimental and risky. But that single journey changed urban life forever. Modern cities were born underground. On June 6, 1944, thousands gathered in Times Square to read the news scrolling across a ticker. Allied forces had landed in Normandy. The crowd didn't cheer immediately. They understood what it meant. Sons, brothers, fathers were already on those beaches. This photograph captured the moment hope and fear collided. In 1911, in Indianapolis, Sarah Breedlove, later known as Madam C.J. Walker, posed beside her automobile. Born to formerly enslaved parents, she built a hair care empire from nothing. By her death, she was one of the first self-made female millionaires in America. Her story rarely appeared in textbooks of her time, but she rewrote what was possible. In 1943, across Britain, mothers gathered at railway stations hoping for news. Many carried small photographs of sons listed as missing. The war didn't only live on battlefields. It lived in waiting rooms and train platforms. This image shows a reality rarely printed in textbooks. Sometimes, the hardest battles were fought in silence. In 1903, children as young as 8 marched through Philadelphia demanding shorter workdays. They worked in mills and mines, 10 hours or more. Photographs like this embarrassed factory owners. They showed faces too young for exhaustion. Within a few years, labor laws began to change, but not before thousands had already paid the price. In 1962, a textile worker named Valentina Tereshkova trained inside a Soviet centrifuge. She had no pilot experience, only determination. A year later, she became the first woman in space. This image wasn't widely shared at first. It revealed something powerful. The space race was not only about rockets, it was about ideology. In 1934, Miami Beach required women's swimsuits to meet strict length rules. Police measured fabric with rulers, so women gathered and mocked the signs publicly. The image spread quickly. It became an early symbol of resistance to unnecessary control over women's bodies. In 1844, Jonathan Walker was punished for helping enslaved people escape. Authorities branded his hand with letters, meant to shame him. Instead, the mark became a symbol. He displayed it proudly during abolitionist speeches. The image reminds us, sometimes punishment becomes protest. In 1907, more than 1 million immigrants passed through Ellis Island. Each stood in line for medical inspection. One mark in chalk could decide their future. A simple letter on a coat meant deportation. This photograph captures a silent moment of suspended hope. In 1911, visitors entered the Louvre and found an empty space on the wall. The Mona Lisa was gone. It had been stolen by a museum employee who simply walked out with it under his coat. For 2 years, the world believed it was lost forever. Ironically, the theft made it the most famous painting on Earth. In 1838, a French inventor captured what is believed to be the first photograph containing a human being. The streets appear empty, but in the lower corner, a man stands still while getting his shoes polished. He survived the long exposure because he didn't move. Without knowing it, he became the first person ever frozen in time. In October 1929, crowds gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange. Some were investors, others were simply watching. Within hours, fortunes would collapse. This image captures the final calm before the Great Depression began reshaping the world economy. In 1936, more than 20,000 people gathered in Kentucky for what would become America's last public execution. Families attended. Vendors sold food. The spectacle shocked the nation. After this event, public executions were banned. The photograph shows how normalized violence once was. In 1911, parts of Niagara Falls froze solid during an extreme winter. Ice bridges formed across the river. Tourists walked dangerously close to the frozen edge. The spectacle drew thousands. Nature paused, but only briefly. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic left Southampton. The crowd believed they were watching history's safest ship begin its journey. This was one of the last clear photographs taken before the disaster. 4 days later, over 1,500 people would be dead. In this image, no one knows what is coming. On May 6, 1937, the German airship Hindenburg approached its landing site in New Jersey. Photographers were ready. Within moments, flames would consume the aircraft. 36 people died. The disaster ended the age of passenger airships almost overnight. In August 1945, in Hiroshima, a person sat on these steps when the atomic bomb detonated. The intense flash left only a shadow on the concrete. The human body vanished instantly. This image became one of the most haunting records of nuclear warfare. A moment frozen in absence. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger shuttle stood on the launch pad. Ice had formed on parts of the booster rockets. 73 seconds after liftoff, it disintegrated. 7 astronauts were killed. This image captures the quiet before a national tragedy. On June 5, 1989, a single man stood in front of a column of tanks in Beijing. He carried nothing but shopping bags. For several minutes, he blocked their path. His identity remains unknown. This photograph became a symbol of individual courage against overwhelming force. In October 1946, a modified military rocket carried a camera 65 miles above Earth. When the film was recovered, it revealed something humanity had never seen before: the curve of the planet. The camera was destroyed on impact, but the image survived. For the first time, we saw our world from outside. On November 9, 1989, crowds climbed the Berlin Wall. For decades, it had divided families and a nation. That night, confusion inside the government triggered a historic mistake. Borders were suddenly opened. The wall didn't fall from war, it fell from words. In 1911, a fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York. Doors had been locked to prevent workers from leaving early. 146 people died, most of them young immigrant women. The outrage that followed transformed American labor laws. The smoke in this image marked the beginning of reform. In 1914, at the outbreak of World War I, the New York Stock Exchange closed for 4 months. Investors feared total financial collapse. It remains the longest shutdown in its history. This image shows something rare: a global economy pressing pause. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery. Her arrest triggered a boycott that lasted over a year. The protest reshaped the American civil rights movement. This image captures quiet resistance, the kind that changes history. In July 1945, scientists gathered in the New Mexico desert around a steel tower. At its top sat the first atomic device ever built. Many feared it might ignite the atmosphere itself. At 5:29 a.m., the desert turned into a second sun. The nuclear age began in silence. In 1992, during the siege of Sarajevo, the National Library burned for 3 days. Nearly 2 million books were destroyed. Centuries of recorded history vanished in smoke. The building was not a military target. It was memory itself. War doesn't only destroy lives, it erases stories. In 1968, during the Vietnam War, some soldiers refused direct orders to fire on civilians. These moments were rarely photographed, even more rarely discussed. This image represents a quiet fracture inside a war already tearing itself apart. History is not only written by obedience. Sometimes it's shaped by refusal. In 1939, Nicholas Winton organized trains that evacuated 669 Jewish children from Nazi-occupied territories. He kept the record secret for decades. Even his wife didn't know. The photograph shows the departure of one of those trains. Most of those children survived because of one man's quiet decision. In 1942, thousands of Japanese American families were placed in relocation camps. Children like this one stood behind barbed wire, not as prisoners of war, but as citizens. No trial, no charges. The photograph reminds us how quickly fear can override rights. On June 8, 1972, children ran down a road after a bombing in Vietnam. One of them, 9-year-old Phan Thi Kim Phuc, became the face of the war. The photograph shocked the world. Public opinion shifted almost overnight. Sometimes, a single image does what years of speeches cannot. On September 11, 2001, photographers captured a man falling from the World Trade Center. His identity remains debated. The image was controversial. Many newspapers refused to print it. It forced the world to confront the human reality of the attacks. History is not only numbers, it is individuals. In 1945, Allied troops documented what they found inside concentration camps. The photographs were taken not for headlines, but as evidence. The world had to see what had happened. Many people later claimed they did not know. These images made denial impossible. In 1995, after the massacre in Srebrenica, thousands of families searched for missing relatives. Many only had photographs. This image shows a mother holding the last picture she has of her son. Some bodies were identified years later. For others, closure never came. On March 11, 2011, residents of a coastal Japanese town watched the ocean pull back unnaturally far. Some walked closer to investigate. Minutes later, a massive tsunami struck. This photograph captures the final calm before disaster. In 1945, after years of war, soldiers returned home. For many children, this was the first time meeting their fathers. The war had shaped their earliest memories, or erased them entirely. This photograph closes one chapter, but for millions, the consequences would last a lifetime. On August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb was dropped over Nagasaki. The cloud rose thousands of feet into the sky. Within seconds, an entire section of the city ceased to exist. Over 70,000 people would die from the blast and radiation. This image marked the irreversible arrival of the nuclear world. In 1943, during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, this photograph captured a small boy standing with his hands raised. He is unnamed. His fate is unknown. The image became one of the most recognizable photographs of the Holocaust. It represents not a statistic, but a child. During the final months of World War II, victims were forced to remove their shoes before execution along the Danube River. Shoes were valuable, bodies were not. Today, a memorial stands there. But this photograph reminds us what the river once carried. Between 1932 and 1933, millions died during the famine in Soviet Ukraine. Entire villages were left without food. Photographs like this were suppressed for decades. The suffering existed, but the record did not. In February 1945, Allied bombing devastated Dresden. Firestorms consumed large parts of the city. Tens of thousands died. The destruction remains debated to this day. War rarely leaves clean moral lines. In 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial opened in Washington. More than 58,000 names were engraved in black stone. Visitors often searched for a single name. War becomes abstract until it is carved in granite. On May 8, 1945, crowds filled the streets of London. Victory in Europe had been declared, but the cheering masked exhaustion. 6 years of war had changed everything. Celebration and grief stood side by side. In 1963, more than 200,000 people gathered in Washington. They marched for jobs and freedom. On that day, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech. The image captures a turning point, when protest became national momentum. On July 20th, 1969, humanity stepped onto the moon. The image was grainy. The transmission was unstable, but the message was clear. Boundaries had shifted. For the first time, Earth was not the limit. In 1989, peaceful protests swept across Eastern Europe. In Prague, crowds gathered with candles instead of weapons. Within weeks, governments collapsed. The Cold War was ending not with missiles, but with voices. In 1994, South Africa held its first fully democratic election. Nelson Mandela emerged after 27 years in prison. The handshake that followed symbolized the end of apartheid. History did not erase pain, but it changed direction. In 1991, the World Wide Web became publicly accessible. At first, it looked unimpressive, simple text on a screen. Few imagined it would reshape communication, politics, and culture. This image marks the quiet beginning of the digital age. On Christmas Eve, 1968, astronauts aboard Apollo 8 captured this image. Earth rising above the moon. For the first time, humanity saw its entire world floating in darkness. Borders disappeared. Politics disappeared. Only one fragile planet remained. In 2018, the last male northern white rhino died under armed guard in Kenya. His name was Sudan. Poaching had pushed his species to extinction. This photograph marked the end of a genetic line millions of years old. History is not only human. In 2019, scientists released the first image of a black hole. It looked blurry, But it confirmed a theory proposed over a century earlier. For the first time, humanity saw the edge of something that devours light itself. On March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. Within weeks, borders closed, streets emptied. The modern world paused in a way few had imagined possible. In 2020, cities that once never slept stood silent. No traffic, no crowds, just echoes. History had shifted again, quietly, globally, simultaneously. Today, humans orbit the same planet that once seemed unreachable. From space, borders are invisible. History feels small, yet its consequences remain. Every photograph we've seen tells the same truth. The future is shaped by the choices made in moments.